One of the most dangerous and violent practices going on in our world, and indeed in Australia, is political government psychiatry. For over 200 years throughout the world, a politically driven political sociological practice that is so violent and dangerous and destructive to the human race that they have literally tortured and killed millions of people throughout the world since before the turn of the last 18th century, since the inception of its practice. There is some research evidence that indicates there are also earlier practices before that. In Australia, over the past 100 years, politicians, Liberal, Labor, Greens and Nationals and their political and government predecessors have used this practice for over 100 years to torture, kill Australians in government facilities and steal from them through the public trust and the public advocate. So horrific and violent and destructive is this practice. Let me give you one example. A man on my YouTube channel made a comment that he was locked up in Western Australia in a psychiatric facility for 3 days. The security guards held him down by force, and it was so violent they broke 3 of his ribs and injected him for 3 days, and then it took him 8 months to learn how to speak properly again when he got out. In every Australian state, politicians and government workers have literally tortured and killed thousands of Australian citizens over the past 100 years in government facilities, prisons and psychiatric facilities, elderly homes and residents. They target the elderly, they target the homeless, they target the weak, they target single parents, they target anybody who's vulnerable. It is such a violent, disgusting, genocidal practice. It must be abolished in Australia. I refer to just a couple of examples of people. This person, Clint Palmer, his mother Marie Palmer, I've been in regular contact with her on the telephone. Mark Thompson, his mother Helen Thompson, I have spoken to her several times on the telephone. Garth Daniels, his parents Liz and Bernard have been fighting for his freedom. Clint Palmer, locked up and forcibly drugged for more than 12 years. Mark Thompson, that's in Queensland. Mark Thompson, forcibly locked up and drugged 20 years in Queensland. Garth Daniels, forcibly locked up and drugged 20 years as well in Victoria. And Dee Tinley was locked up and drugged. She's the sister of a Labor politician in Western Australia. Periodically locked up and drugged, and they want to drug her in her home. They go into people's home and inject them under what they call CTO, Nazi fascist orders. This is a shocking, disgusting, violent, Nazi fascist practice driven by the politicians in Australia, driven by the politicians throughout the world. A plethora of government workers supporting it. Now, I say to the public, how would you like to be locked up and drugged? How would you like to be locked up and drugged for 12 years or 20 years or 20 years or 6 weeks? How would you like to be injected by force and held down violently? They use the police like Nazism with the psychiatry. It is so shocking and violent and dangerous. And what is the public doing to stop it? And I say to the politicians and the psychiatrists in Australia, you should be locked up and drugged. You should be locked up and injected by force to stop your disgusting, violent, Nazi, fascist practices where you have literally tortured and murdered thousands of Australian citizens over the past 100 years in each Australian state. You are cold-blooded murderers. When is the public going to wake up and fight to stop this disgusting, shocking, violent, Nazi, fascist, genocidal practices? These people will die. And my brother is being drugged as well in Western Australia. Drugging my brother periodically on and off. Drugging people, you just drug them and drug them and drug them and drug them until they're dead. You should be drugged, locked up and drugged by force with violence, and you should have the same treatment done to you until this practice is abolished in Australia and throughout the world.